I've been searching for you.
Seo Kang-Woo stands near the bar, holding a flute of champagne he hasn't touched in 10 minutes. He is Korea's third wealthiest man, chairman of a conglomerate that touches steel, shipping, and half a continent's telecom grid. And 23 years ago, in a different country and a different life, he signed the papers that ended his marriage to a woman his family decided he couldn't keep. He hasn't thought about that signature in years. Tonight it surfaces. A young woman steps onto the small stage near the auction tables to accept a scholarship she helped fund through a nonprofit she runs out of a converted brownstone in Harlem. Her accent is pure New York, nothing close to Seoul. Still, something in her cadence stops him cold. The way she pauses before a hard consonant. The way her head tilts when she searches for a word. He's heard that exact rhythm before. From a woman he loved at 26 and lost at 28. His aide leans in to ask if he's ready to leave. He doesn't answer. He's watching the young woman tuck a loose curl behind her ear with her left hand, the same wrist angle Maya Johnson used without thinking. Back when noticing her was the only thing he did all day. Kang-Woo trained himself out of sentiment a long time ago. Sentiment cost him a marriage and nearly cost him his father's company. He rebuilt into a man who reads a room before he reads a contract, who senses a lie from across a table, who hasn't been caught off guard in a meeting since 2009. None of that prepares him for a stranger's hands. He asks a board member who she is. Nia Johnson, the man says, runs an education nonprofit. Good face for the foundation's next campaign. Kang-Woo isn't listening anymore. He's doing math he hasn't touched since the year he left Seoul, a different person than the one who arrived. 23 years. A daughter would be 22 or 23 now, if Maya had been pregnant before the divorce closed, if she'd never managed to tell him, if his family had made certain she never could. He tells himself it's coincidence. People share gestures by accident. The world is large enough for that. He doesn't believe it for a second. After her speech, Nia crosses toward the dessert table, and for 3 seconds their eyes meet from 20 feet away. She gives him the nod a stranger gives a stranger, at an event neither of them wanted to attend. Nothing more. She has no idea who he is, beyond a name on a donor list. She grew up resenting a father she never met, a man her mother described only once, as someone who chose his family's money over his own. She built her adult life in direct opposition to that ghost. Generous, where he was supposedly cold. Present, where he was supposedly absent. The ghost is standing across the room, holding a glass he still hasn't finished. Kang-Woo leaves the gala early. In the car, he says one sentence to Young, his head of security, a man who's worked for him since before the divorce, who remembers Maya, who remembers the version of Kang-Woo that existed before the company swallowed the rest of him. Find out everything about her, quietly, tonight. Young doesn't ask who, he's already pulling out his phone. 3 hours later, on the 41st floor of a building Kang-Woo owns outright, Young returns with a folder and a face that's lost its usual composure. He doesn't speak right away. He sets a single page on the desk and steps back, the way a man steps back from something he doesn't want, standing too close when it goes off. Kang-Woo looks down. A genetic comparison. A probability score in bold type at the top. 99.98%. He's built and lost fortunes in a single afternoon. He's sat across from prime ministers and walked away with treaties signed in his favor. None of it taught him how to read 4 numbers and feel his chest cave in at the same time. He sets the page down, picks it back up, reads it again, as if a second read might say something different. It doesn't. The report doesn't read any differently a third time. He folds it once, then again, until the 4 digits disappear into a crease, small enough to fit inside his jacket pocket, and that small act of containment is the only decision he manages with any confidence for several minutes. Jung asks if he wants the jet readied. Kang-Woo is already reaching for his coat. 9 hours later, he's standing on a sidewalk in Harlem, in front of a brownstone, with a hand-painted sign for Maya's literacy nonprofit, in a suit that costs more than the building's last renovation, waiting for a door to open. Maya opens it herself. She doesn't say his name. She looks at him the way she'd look at a man trying to sell her something she already knows is broken. He starts to speak, and she cuts him off before the first word lands. 23 years buys a person the right to talk first, she tells him. And he doesn't argue. She lets him into the front hallway, not the apartment, and that's the only mercy she offers. The words come fast once she starts. Calls that went straight to a number that no longer existed. Letters she assumed he never bothered to write. A hospital bill from Nia's second birthday. The year a fever kept her up for 3 straight nights with no one beside her. No family on either continent willing to answer the phone. Years spent telling a little girl that her father was a closed subject, because the alternative was telling her the truth, that Maya didn't actually know what the truth was. Kang-Woo doesn't defend himself. He's run boardrooms where silence is a weapon he wields on purpose. Here it isn't strategy. He genuinely has nothing he can say that survives contact with what she just described. He tells her the only thing he has. He didn't leave. He was removed by people with more leverage over his life than he had at 26, and he spent the years after believing she'd chosen to disappear rather than face what his family had done to them both. Maya laughs, short and humorless. She's heard rich men explain away their absence before. Every donor at every gala has a version of this story, dressed up as tragedy instead of choice. Then he sets a folder on the small table by the door. Bank records. Phone logs his legal team pulled from his father's old accounts. A signed statement from the family attorney who arranged the original divorce. Proof that someone changed her number from the inside, that someone intercepted what she sent, that the silence she lived inside for 2 decades was built, deliberately, by people who shared his last name. Maya doesn't touch the folder. She stares at it the way a person stares at a structure they spent years standing inside, watching it lose a wall. The fury in the room shifts angle. It doesn't disappear. It just stops having a clean target, and a fury without a clean target is harder to carry than one that does. For the first time since he walked in, she sits down. Across town, Nia is having her own version of this collision. A board member's assistant let it slip at the gala follow-up call, half by accident, half because money rarely keeps its own secrets for long. Nia's father isn't just alive. He's Seo Kang-Woo, chairman. A name she's seen in business headlines without once connecting it to the empty space at her kitchen table growing up. He calls her directly that evening. She lets it ring twice before answering, mostly to prove to herself she could. He offers an apartment in a building she's walked past 100 times without affording the lobby. She tells him she already has one. He offers to clear whatever debt remains from school. She tells him the debt is hers, earned honestly, and she'd like to keep it that way. He offers introductions, connections, the entire machinery of his world laid open for her use. She tells him no to all of it, evenly, like she's been rehearsing the word her whole life without knowing who it was for. He hears punishment in her refusal. She hears an apology dressed up as a transaction, the same move rich men make when they want absolution without doing the slower work of earning it. Later that night, back at her mother's apartment, Nia goes looking for an old photo album to settle her nerves before bed, something familiar to hold on to after a day that rearranged her entire history. In the back of her mother's closet, behind a stack of winter coats, she finds a shoebox sealed shut, with packing tape gone brittle with age. Inside, when she finally breaks the seal, there are letters, dozens of them, then more beneath those, then more beneath those. Every envelope addressed in the same handwriting. Everyone marked with a sole postmark from a year she was too young to remember. Every single one still sealed. The first letter Nia opens is dated 3 months after her mother left Seoul, and the handwriting inside is frantic, in a way money never sounds in the headlines she's read about this man. He writes that he's hired 3 investigators. He writes that he's tried every number he has for Maya and gotten silence on all of them. He writes that his father told him she left on her own, that she wanted nothing more to do with the family, and that some buried part of him refuses to believe it. The part that remembers how she used to argue with him for 20 minutes about nothing, rather than walk away from an unfinished conversation. Nia reads through the night. The letters change over the years, frantic giving way to something quieter and more wounded, search efforts giving way to resignation, resignation giving way to a kind of grief that doesn't perform itself for anyone, since the man writing these had no idea anyone would ever read them. The father she built in her head for 23 years was simple. Rich, cold, gone by choice. The man on these pages searched a continent for a woman his own family told him to forget, and kept writing to a daughter he didn't know existed yet. Just in case. She sits with that contradiction until the sun comes up. Kang-Woo isn't sleeping either. He's 3 floors below his own executive suite, in a records room his assistant didn't know existed until last night. Going through 2 decades of internal correspondence with a forensics team he swore to secrecy. What surfaces by morning isn't a rumor. It's documentation, a memo from his father, 18 years dead, outlining the strategy to protect the dynasty from what he called an unsuitable union. A wire transfer to the telecom provider that changed Maya's number within a week of the divorce filing. A signed retainer agreement with the family attorney, who drafted both the divorce papers and, 6 months later, a non-disclosure arrangement nobody asked Kang-Woo to approve, because nobody asked Kang-Woo anything back then. 3 board members appear in the paper trail by name. Men who still sit 2 seats down from him at every quarterly meeting. Men who've shaken his hand at funerals and weddings since, fully aware of what they helped bury. He doesn't confront them yet. He sits with the documents the way a surgeon sits with a scan, before deciding where to cut. Word moves fast inside companies built on appearances. By the second day, 2 of the named board members have lawyers on retainer, and 1 has quietly liquidated a portion of his holdings. The kind of move that reads as guilt to anyone who knows where to look. The conglomerate's general counsel requests an urgent private meeting. If this surfaces in the press, she tells him, it isn't a scandal contained to one family. Shareholders pull out. Partners in Tokyo and Singapore distance themselves from the brand overnight. 20,000 jobs sit downstream of a story about 1 signature. Kang-Woo tells her he understands the math. He doesn't say what he's already decided. What eats at him isn't the years he lost. It's the realization that he was 26 and powerful enough to run half a company. Yet he let a room full of older men make the most important decision of his life, without once standing up from the table. He keeps returning to that detail, rather than the decade of search efforts that came after. The search proves he loved her. The silence in that boardroom proves something he likes less about himself. Nia calls her mother that morning, letters still spread across her bed. Maya doesn't pick up on the first try. When she finally does, Nia doesn't ask about the letters yet. She just asks one question, quietly. Did you ever stop loving him? Or did you just stop letting yourself? Maya doesn't answer right away. The silence on the line says more than either of them is ready to say out loud. That evening, an email lands in Nia's inbox from an address she doesn't recognize. No subject line, a single attachment. She almost deletes it as spam before opening it out of habit. Inside is a surveillance log. Timestamps. Her own daily movements over the past 6 days. The coffee shop on 145th. The subway entrance she uses twice a day. The exact bench in Riverside Park where she eats lunch most Tuesdays. At the bottom, a single line typed in plain text. They never stopped watching either of you. They're still watching now. Nia forwards the email to Kang-Woo before she finishes processing what she just read, and his phone lights up with her name at 4 in the morning. The first time she's called him by choice rather than necessity. He's at her door within the hour, Jung trailing 2 steps behind, with a face that hasn't settled since he saw the attachment himself. Kang-Woo reads the log twice in her kitchen, standing, coat still on. The bench in Riverside Park is specific enough to mean someone watched her sit there more than once. That kind of detail doesn't come from a stranger. It comes from someone with access to internal security protocols his own company uses to track executives traveling through hostile territory. He runs the digital trail back to its source, that same day, working through channels even his general counsel doesn't know exist. What he finds doesn't lead to a junior analyst or an overzealous board member protecting a stock price. It leads to his half-brother, Min-jun, son of his father's second marriage, a man who has spent 15 years 2 steps behind Kang-Woo at every shareholder meeting, smiling at the right moments, waiting. If Nia is recognized publicly, the inheritance structure shifts. Min-jun's position on the eventual succession ladder drops from contender to afterthought. He's spent over a decade building alliances on the board for exactly this scenario, a clean transition when Kang-Woo eventually steps back, and a daughter nobody planned for threatens to collapse all of it in a single press cycle. Kang-Woo confronts him directly. No lawyers in the room, just the two of them in Min-jun's office, on a floor Kang-Woo rarely visits. Min-jun doesn't deny it. He doesn't even pretend to be sorry. He tells Kang-Woo that protecting the company has always meant protecting it from exactly this kind of mess. Sentiment dressed up as family, threatening 4 decades of work built by people who understood sacrifice. Kang-Woo tells him the sacrifice already happened, 23 years ago, and it wasn't his to make. Walking out of that office, he feels something close to clarity for the first time in years. He spent 4 decades treating the company like a body he was responsible for, protecting, shielding it from sentiment, building walls high enough that nothing personal could get through. It never once occurred to him to ask what the company had done to protect him in return. Not when his father forced the divorce. Not when 2 decades of his life went missing because men in suits decided silence served the bottom line. He built his entire identity guarding an institution that left him exposed every single time it actually mattered. Min-jun doesn't back down. Within days, financial outlets run anonymous pieces questioning Maya's character. Old immigration status rumors resurfacing from nowhere, framed as concerned reporting, rather than the coordinated campaign it actually is. Private investigators tail Naya openly now, no longer bothering to stay hidden, parked outside her nonprofit in unmarked cars. A board faction aligned with Min-jun calls for an emergency session, citing reputational risk to the company from Kang-Woo's, quote, personal entanglements. Maya reads the first article before her coffee finishes brewing. An unnamed source describing her as opportunistic. The old rumors stitched into something that reads almost plausible if no one looks too closely. She's lived through public scrutiny before, in smaller rooms, smaller stakes, back when Kang-Woo's family decided she wasn't worth defending. The fear gripping her now isn't really about her own name in print. It's older than that. It's the specific dread of watching a powerful family circle a man she loves for the second time in her life, already knowing how that story ended the first time. She survived losing him once, barely, over 23 slow years. She isn't certain there's a version of her left that survives it twice. For the first time in his adult life, Kang-Woo walks into a boardroom without a script. He stands before the full board, Min-jun seated near the head of the table, with the calm of a man who believes he's already won. Kang-Woo doesn't open with numbers or quarterly projections. He opens by saying the word daughter out loud. In that room, for the first time since the divorce reshaped his life decades ago. He tells them Nia Johnson is his child, that the woman they're smearing in the press is the mother of that child, and that he intends to acknowledge both of them publicly, regardless of what it costs the company's stock price by Monday. The room goes silent, in the specific way rooms go silent, when everyone present understands the ground just shifted under them. Nia watches a live stream of the meeting from her apartment, a feed one of his loyal staffers risked his job to send her. She watches a man she spent 23 years hating choose to lose a fortune in front of the same people he's spent his life answering to. Something in her starts to crack open. Not forgiveness yet, but the early architecture of it. Min-jun rises before the room can react further. He's been waiting for this exact moment, and he doesn't waste it. He produces a document from inside his jacket. A private agreement signed by their father 18 years ago, one Kang-Woo has never seen, one that grants the board emergency authority to remove any chairman who, in their judgment, brings the company into material disrepute through personal conduct. Min-jun sets it on the table in front of the full board. He has the votes already lined up. He's had them for weeks. The document sits on the table between them. Kang-Woo doesn't reach for it. "You've been carrying that for weeks," he says. "I can tell by how steady your hands are right now. Men don't hold paper that's still, unless they've already rehearsed the moment." Min-jun doesn't blink. "I held onto it because I hoped I wouldn't need it. You made that hope difficult tonight." "Read the clause out loud," Kang-Woo says. "Let everyone at this table hear exactly what our father wrote, and exactly what it took for you to find a use for it." Min-jun reads it. The room listens to language built 2 decades ago by a dying man trying to control his company from beyond the boardroom. A clause granting the board emergency authority to remove any chairman whose personal conduct brings material disrepute to the institution. When he finishes, he sets the page down with the care of a man placing a winning hand on a card table. The vote is already secured, Min-jun says. I'd rather you step down with some dignity intact than force a public count. Before anyone votes, Kang-Woo says, I'd like the board to see something else. He opens the folder he brought with him. He doesn't summarize it. He reads from it directly, name by name, document by document. Their father's memo authorizing interference in a 26-year-old's marriage. The wire transfer that silenced a phone line in Seoul within a week of a divorce filing. A surveillance log traced to internal security credentials tied to accounts under Min-jun's direct authority, the same accounts used last month to track a woman and her daughter in New York. A board member 2 seats down, a woman who sat across from Kang-Woo for 11 years, finally speaks. Is this confirmed? Independently confirmed? By an outside forensics team, your own audit committee can verify by morning, Kang-Woo says. I'm not asking you to take my word for it. I'm asking you to read it yourselves before you vote on anything. Min-jun's composure slips for the first time. This is a private family matter, being weaponized in a public forum. You weaponized a private family matter 23 years ago, Kang-Woo says. I'm only telling people what you built. Another board member clears his throat. Chairman, if this is accurate, the company has exposure that goes well beyond your personal conduct. It does, Kang-Woo says, which is exactly why I'm putting it on this table myself, instead of letting it surface some other way, on some other timeline, controlled by someone else's interests. Min-jun's voice rises slightly. You're going to burn this company down over a woman you knew for 2 years, and a daughter you've known for 2 months. Kang-Woo looks at him for a long moment before answering. I'm going to stop letting this company decide who I'm allowed to love. I did that once already. I watched what it cost everyone involved. I'm not doing it twice. The vote happens within the hour. Kang-Woo is removed as chairman, effective immediately. Min-jun's faction frames it to the press as a necessary stabilization, a board protecting shareholder confidence from a personal scandal. The financial outlets run a different version by morning, the fastest removal of a sitting chairman in the company's 60-year history, triggered by a corruption disclosure the chairman made about his own family. Both versions circulate. Only one of them holds up once outside investigators get involved a week later, and it isn't the version Min-jun told. Kang-Woo walks out of the building that night, carrying a single box from his old office. No security detail, no car waiting, since he sent the driver home an hour earlier without telling anyone why. He stands on the sidewalk for a long moment, in a city that has watched him arrive and leave through that same entrance more times than he can count, and something unfamiliar settles into his chest. Not grief, not even relief. Something closer to the feeling of finally setting down a weight he'd carried so long he'd stopped noticing the shape of it. The company doesn't recover cleanly. Over the following months, outside investigators confirm what Kang-Woo already proved, and the fallout moves through the organization the way fire moves through dry wood. Fast and indifferent to which parts deserve to burn. Min-jun resigns under pressure before the board can vote him out themselves. Shareholders who spent decades rewarding silence start asking questions about everything else that silence might have covered. None of it touches Kang-Woo the way it once would have. He isn't chairman of anything anymore. He's a man with significantly more time than he's had in 30 years, and no instructions for what to do with it. He uses some of that time badly at first. He shows up to Nia's nonprofit with an offer to fund a new building outright, and she turns him down flat, the same way she's turned down every offer since the gala. I don't need a building, she tells him. I need you to show up to the Tuesday board meetings like everyone else does. On time, with opinions, not with a checkbook. So he does. He sits through 3 hours of budget discussions about after-school tutoring slots, says little the first few weeks, starts contributing ideas by the 4th. He learns she takes her coffee from the cart on the corner, not the espresso bar 2 blocks down he assumed she'd prefer. He learns she hates being interrupted mid-sentence more than almost anything else, a habit she traces back to a childhood spent rarely being asked to finish a thought. He stops interrupting. It takes him longer than it should, but he stops. With Maya, the rebuilding happens slower and in smaller rooms. One evening, several weeks after the board vote, she finds him sitting on her front steps when she gets home. No appointment, no warning. I keep doing the math, he tells her. before she can ask why he's there. 23 years. I keep trying to calculate what we would have built if none of it happened. And I can't make the numbers mean anything. There's no version of that equation that gives me back the time. Maya sits down beside him on the steps. I used to do the same math, she says. For the first 10 years, I did it constantly. I'd see fathers at her school events and run the comparison in my head, what should have been ours. Does it stop? It changes, she says. It stops being a wound you're reopening and starts being a fact you're just aware of. I'm not there yet, completely, but I'm closer than I was a year ago. He looks at her directly. I never stopped. I want you to know that, even though I know it doesn't fix what the silence cost you. I searched for 3 years before I gave up believing I'd find you. And even after I stopped searching, I never stopped loving you. I just got better at not looking at it. Maya doesn't answer right away. When she does, her voice is quieter than before. I think I did the same thing. I told myself I'd buried it. I think I just got good at not checking whether it was still breathing. Neither of them resolves anything that night. They sit on the steps until the streetlights come on, two people grieving the same loss from opposite sides of it for the first time together, instead of separately, which turns out to be its own kind of beginning. On a quiet evening months later, the three of them gather in Maya's apartment for dinner. Nothing formal, nothing staged, the kind of ordinary evening that wouldn't have existed a year earlier and now happens almost every other week. Nia hands him a small framed photograph before they sit down to eat. It's the three of them, taken at her nonprofit's spring event. The first picture anyone has ever taken of all three of them in the same frame. Kang-Woo holds it longer than the moment requires. His hands aren't steady, and he doesn't try to hide that they aren't. Nia watches him for a moment, then speaks without any of the old edge in her voice. You missed 23 years, she says. But if you want to, you can be my father for the rest of them. He doesn't answer right away. He doesn't need to. The empire is gone. The title is gone. The version of himself that measured a life in market share is gone too. And none of it weighs anything against the photograph shaking slightly in his hands. What he spent a fortune trying to buy back was never for sale to begin with. It had to be earned, slowly, in a kitchen with no cameras and no shareholders, by a man finally willing to lose everything else to deserve it.